How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, we are doing it live. I am going to try to do it this way a little bit more often because I think it may be a better way to get more subscribers. I'm pushing my way to 50,000, so I'm pretty proud of myself. But I think live, I promised around 50,000 I would start doing more live. So I think when I do the show, I'm just going to do them live. I'm even going to have Denise come on later in the week. We're going to discuss about a sad case about an 11-year-old girl that took her own life. But today, what I want to talk about is the Karmelo Anthony case, and we want to focus on his time in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. I did a show earlier. The information, it was there, but there was a lot more explaining to do. So I immediately thought of my boy Joe. I figured Joe would help me through this, and that's why we have Joe on now. It's been a while, Joe. First off, Joe, how is life?
Life has been busy, man. Taking over this jail as a jail administrator for the sheriff's department, it's definitely been a steady process.
Yeah, and now, I mean, for someone that should be retiring right now, you're actually probably the most involved you've ever been in corrections.
Pretty much, yeah. I'm working harder now than I ever have.
All right. So, hey, Joe, do you mind, giving an introduction to our audience?
Yeah, my name is Joe Pomponio. I am a retired lieutenant from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice of 29 years, 6 months. Retired back in 21, which point I went to the Jasper County Sheriff's Office and started there as a jailer and worked my way up to assistant jail administrator. And as of January 1 of this year, my former jail administrator retired and I took over his spot. Now back in the saddle with Anthony here doing a Tier Talk episode.
Yeah, we got to start doing these more often together. I didn't get a chance to schedule this out. I'm just trying to do the stuff live. So bear with me, guys. There's only 3 of us. If anybody's watching and they want to share it out, please do. I'm actually going to share it out right now. So just give me a second. I want to get it on my platforms real quick. So bear with me. Hopefully I'll bring in a little bit more traffic. And then we'll get into the show. What I would like to do first, Joe, is read a little background about the Karmelo Anthony case, but we'll do that really quick. I think a lot of people understand where the case is right now. And then after that, I would like to kind of talk about what we're going to discuss, his time at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice.
Okay.
But, Joe, you're familiar with the case, correct?
I am familiar with the case, yeah.
All right, so... All right, guys, just bear with me 1 second, guys. I'm sharing the video out to the different groups, and then I will go right into the discussion. I need about maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and I am on call today, which Joe understands what that means. So if I do get any phone calls, I may have to quickly give Joe the mic real quick, so I can go ahead and take that phone call. But I am going to start doing more live shows, so hopefully you guys spread the word. All right, guys, just bear with me, guys. I'm just sharing it out now, so hold on. I'm going to do it to all these different groups, so bear with me. Need about, 30 seconds, not even.
Well, I got my YouTube up in a separate tab, but I can't see Facebook for mine. So if you get any Facebook comments, I won't be able to see them.
I'll get them.
Okay.
Guys, if you're going to comment this, it would be good if you comment through the YouTube channel. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3. Sorry, guys, I don't have a producer. I got to do this my own. So I just want to share these out real quick to the true crime community, make sure I can get some traffic in. A lot of people are telling me that they're not seeing my new videos being promoted, pushed out. So I'm going to try doing live because I did promise this is something I was gonna start doing anyway. Where's my true crime stuff? Hold on 1 second. Just one last group.
I haven't seen too many of your lives pop up on my mind either. I see more videos and pictures of Mia and Sienna than.
Yeah, I don't know why it doesn't. It just plays that game. I have no idea why, but hopefully, the lives allows for interaction. So I do want to kind of go over that little just real quickly the background. So I need about a minute here. Let me get through this, and then we'll go to our discussion about what Karmelo Anthony's life is going to be like in TDCJ. I mean, he is 19. There's a lot of things that we have to take account for. And I know a lot of people are like, well, who cares? Well, we have to. That's our job. So if you guys aren't familiar with the Karmelo Anthony case, let me just go through the background here before we get into the discussion. And Joe does work for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, so he'll be able to explain some of the questions that we've had. And if you guys do have questions here, put it in the comments here and I'll put them in. So Karmelo Anthony is 19-year-old from Frisco, Texas area who had just been sentenced to 35 years in state prison for the murder of 17-year-old Austin Metcalf. The stabbing happened on April 2nd, 2025 during a district track meet at a Frisco ISD stadium. Multiple schools were competing that day, including Centennial High School, where Karmelo attended, and Memorial High School, where Austin was a student athlete. According to trial evidence and police reports, Karmelo was sitting under the Memorial High School team tent in the bleachers, essentially in the rival school space. Memorial athletes, including Austin, repeatedly told him to leave. Witnesses testified that the interaction escalated with words exchanged and tensions building. Prosecutors argued that Karmelo was the one provoking and taunting. Some teenage witnesses said they heard him cursing and antagonizing Austin before things turned physical. At some point, Austin pushed Karmelo. The defense framed this shove as the triggering act that made Karmelo fear he was about to be attacked by multiple rivals. Karmelo had a 3.5-inch knife in his bag. After the push, he drew the knife and stabbed Austin once in the chest, penetrating the heart. Austin collapsed at the scene and later died of that single wound. His father has described holding his son as he died on a rainy day at the stadium. Karmelo did not deny stabbing Austin. From the very beginning, he claimed self-defense. A school resource officer's body cam captured him saying things like, he put his hands on me and I was protecting myself, and asking whether the incident could be considered self-defense and whether Austin was going to be okay. Investigators found no evidence that the two teens had any relationship before that day. This was not a long-running feud, but a confrontation that exploded during a school event. Texas charged Karmelo with first-degree murder, although he was 17 at the time of the stabbing. Texas law allowed him to be tried as an adult because of the seriousness of the offense, and the indictment carried a sentencing range of 5 to 99 years. During trial, the state presented nearly 20 witnesses, emphasizing eyewitness accounts that painted Karmelo as the instigator who brought a knife into a school setting and chose to escalate a verbal dispute into lethal violence. The defense argued that he was a good student who panicked and used the knife because he felt outnumbered and under threat. After roughly a week of testimony, the jury was instructed on murder and self-defense. That they deliberated for around 3 hours before finding Karmelo guilty of murder, rejecting the self-defense claim. In the punishment phase, the defense argued sudden passion, essentially that strong emotion at that moment should reduce his exposure. The jury also rejected that, choosing a 35-year sentence, well below the 99-year max, but far above the minimum. Because he was tried as an adult, that 35-year sentence is a standard Texas Department of Criminal Justice term. Reporting has noted that depending on how his sentence is structured and any good time of parole rules that apply, he could first see parole eligibility sometime in his 30s, but he does not have a juvenile sentence. This is an adult prison term. Immediately after sentencing, he spent one night in the Collin County Jail where a new booking photo was taken. The jail placed him in isolation, not in a regular tank, citing safety concerns given the high-profile nature of the case. And within about a few days, he was transferred to the custody of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, TDCJ, processed him through intake, issuing a state prison number, which we'll go over today, doing their own screening and taking another mugshot, and then moved him to his assigned unit. Multiple outlets now confirm that his current placement is the Wallace Pack unit near Navasota, a medium security men's prison that houses G1 to G3 general population inmates with some security detention. Karmelo's legal team has already filed a formal notice of appeal, which is the first procedural step towards asking a higher court to review the conviction and sentence for legal error. And that doesn't mean he gets a new trial. It simply preserves his right to challenge what happened in this one. Appeals in serious felony cases can take months or years to resolve. And finally, outside the courtroom, the case has become a flashpoint. National and local media highlighted the racial dynamic, a black defendant and a white victim, even while the lawyers insisted race was not part of the legal instructions. There have been protests, social media campaigns, crowdfunding efforts, and competing narratives about whether this was a murder, tragic overreaction, or a justified self-defense that the jury got wrong. All of that public attention and polarization is the backdrop to the next phase of this story, which is what we're going to do today. So basically, we're going to focus on 19-year-old with a 35-year hit and national name recognition entering TDCJ and being placed in a medium security dorm style prison. Hey, I will say one thing, Joe. When you go to claim self-defense, and I learned this between the cases I've been covering now, true crime, and I've got to have you on more, Joe, because the audience does love you. I know you had just crossed into the leadership position there. I didn't know if there were any concerns, but it looks like you're able to do it. So I would love to have you on more. If you're doing any events, stuff that you want to promote, let me know. And if you ever want to pay for my travel, I will do the training for your facility for free. Just got to pay for my travel and maybe a Starbucks or two. Hey, when you don't take, before we get into the jail stuff, when I know that lawyers don't like to try to maybe put up the defense attorneys may not always want to put up their client because they're concerned of the cross evaluation or the cross examination.
Cross examination, yeah.
That said, when you're claiming self defense, how do you not go up and speak for yourself?
I don't know. It may be a thing where his lawyer might have considered that putting him up there. You got to figure this kid is facing life in prison. He's probably nervous as hell, and his attorney probably figured it probably wouldn't be the best thing up there. If he's up there nervous and under cross examination, some of those can get pretty tough. So, the lawyer probably figured that he would actually do probably more harm than good.
Yeah, I mean, he may have a story that he can't defend too.
Exactly.
So I got Barbara. Hey, Barbara. Yeah, I'm answering your question, actually, Barbara. Barbara's the one that posed this question. And I did have an earlier video, but then I had to make some changes. And I just said, you know what, let me delete it. Let me call back Joe. And then eventually, this actually is great news because, Barbara, you reunited me and a good friend of mine. So your request turned out to be a lot more meaningful than you may realize. All right, so great info. So hey, so let's start this process off because let's talk about now that he's been handed over to the state. I know that at the county jail he was in some level of isolation, but Joe, you worked at county jails. They can't really do that long term, right?
Yeah, we can't generally do it long term. For our guys in the county jail, when they either get convicted or they sign for their time voluntarily through plea deals or what have you, generally we have, or should I say, Texas Department of Criminal Justice has 45 days to get, once we send their pen packet in, they have 45 days to take custody of these guys. We don't want to leave them there forever because, again, it could do more harm than good, especially if, they isolated, Karmelo. So, him being away from population was probably a good thing for him. The county jails are filled with these guys that are, put ideas in this kid's head and probably make him more terrified than he already is going to prison. So, we try not to leave them in there for more than 45 days. After that point, they actually have to pay us to house them. So they definitely don't want to spend that kind of money. So they're pretty good about getting them out of our custody pretty quick. Average is, 30 to 35 days. So
that's once they've been sentenced, right?
Correct. Once they've been sentenced, their time with TDCJ starts the day that they sign their court papers and put their thumbprint after either the conviction or, like I said, if they voluntarily take a plea deal. As soon as they put their thumbprint and that judgment's entered in the court, their TDCJ time starts right then.
Yeah. Now, if he became someone you couldn't manage at the jail level, like let's say this trial tended to be long-term and now we're looking at long-term isolation and the jail decides, this isn't something we could do. Let's go ahead and send him over to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Now they would have to pay you, but they would also audit the facility because if they're paying you, they want compliance with what they would expect from if he was housed with them at the jail, correct?
Yeah, correct. And if that became the case, we would actually have to house him separately from the county jail offenders because they're actually considered two different classifications of inmates. You got the pre-convicted, post-convicted. So we wouldn't be able to house him with any of our county jail inmates anyway. So that, that's a secondary problem. That's why they tend to get them out of there pretty quick, just so they can get them into their own facility where he's housed and classed with, same majority of the inmates, facing the same issues as him.
And then Carmelo, obviously, once he goes to the state, he will get more freedom.
Well, yeah, he will get more freedom. His first three, generally, with high profile cases, depending on, because I just had one of my inmates that just signed for 50 years for killing a 19-year-old female. Of course, it's not, it didn't get nowhere near the amount of publicity that, Carmelo's case did. The guy that was convicted in her case is really not a behavioral problem. He was very forthcoming from the get-go. I did it, let's just do this and get it over with. He's not really a behavioral issue, so there's really no need for me to put a call into TDCJ to expedite his transfer from my facility into TDJ custody. With Carmelo's, it's a little bit different. There was a lot of racial tension going on there. There was a lot of press coverage. I'm sure the sheriff's department there was taking a lot of questions, a lot of heat from the media, from the public, from, both sides of the gamut. So, in that case, it's probably better to get him to TDCJ custody quicker, just so you can kind of ease the tension, separate, lower the flame, let things kind of calm down and wind down a little bit. And, at the same time, it keeps Karmelo from being in the county jail and listening to these wannabe gangsters and wannabe inmates. And, man, I've done hard time when, in fact, they've only done like a 3-year sentence, and they fill this kid's head with ideas and bullshit. So really it starts the process sooner for him so he can get acclimated and kind of wrap his mind around things, separate himself from what's going on and get kind of resigned to doing his time.
Yeah, when someone has attention on themselves, I've dealt with high profile inmates as well. You got to manage the attention and then every that person at every angle, because one, it's funny because even though we've been in the business for quite some time, the attention has so many things, so many variables that come into play. One is attention can put the inmate at risk. Another thing here is, don't forget, Carmelo's only 19. See, look, Donna just said, and I love her. Donna's my girl. She didn't get the notification. I don't know what goes on, but I am going to start doing lives, guys, and I'm going to try to commit to a specific time. But YouTube does not serve me out. I just got a text from my wife saying she didn't get the notification either. So one is, you're managing a 19-year-old. That also matters. Even though he's an adult, he's over 18. He's also within that youth. And there are concerns. You'll still have eyes on him. But with the attention, it's unique because you got to manage the attention, which means that all eyes are going to be on everything that facility does, from the smallest of levels to the highest of levels, from operations to who he interacts with on staff, to what he eats, to what type of shampoo he washes his hair with. I mean, because right now, anything about Karmelo Anthony is going to get views. And you have to be aware that your facility is going to be under a microscope. And I know there are inmates that don't like this type of attention. And all of a sudden, someone comes in with this type of profile, and all of a sudden, these inmates are like, "Yo, we don't want this kid here. This kid puts too much eyes on this facility." All of a sudden, there's more staffing, more searching. But the other unique thing with Karmelo is, even though a lot of people say, "Well, the attention could bring risk." Oh yeah, I get it. Stuff goes on the news. You don't know how the media is going to spin something. Right now, you got the racial tension. That's a concern that would ultimately have to somehow be managed when it comes to his safety. But also, and I got to ask Joe this too, tension also brings influence.
It absolutely can.
I don't think people think of that, Joe.
It absolutely can. Attention can bring influence. You think about, the different, like the rap artists that have gone to prison, they bring their influence. Celebrity athletes that have been convicted and sent to the penitentiary, they bring their influence too. So you definitely have to think about the influence that he can bring and can he just, can he change the culture of what I've got going at my facility?
Yeah. So guys, when I did an earlier show, I did some reading on TDCJ. I wanted to look at their levels of status. Now, guys, across the country, you're going to find that facilities do it differently. Texas, I saw a G1 through a G5 for us. We have just levels, from community release all the way up to the most highly restrictive. It's just very simple in its wording, and I think that actually helps us out in my state because it's easier translated if you ever have to go to court and explain what your position is. But this is what I thought was unique. So when I did the show, that I wind up pulling down. Mona, thank you for your help on that, by the way, if you watch this. Mona had information that I didn't have, and I thought the information created a pretty big paradigm shift to what I was covering. But I automatically, when you're dealing with a high-profile inmate, and even though, like, it's not a crime that he'd be a target, it's not like a sex offense or something like that. It's a crime that, not to minimize what he's done, but it's a crime where he stabbed, let's say, another individual at a track meet. Now you got the context of how the media is pushing it forward, how the family's pushing it. It's got, he's got some notoriety, and it's also got some conflict because they're saying it's a racial thing. So now you got to manage, as I said, the attention that this case just happens to be getting. But like Joe said, it's no different than most other cases. You just got the eyes on it. But when you have this type of notoriety, if he was already in isolation in the jail, what is TDCJ now doing when he gets sentenced and they pick him up and they now take him through their process?
Well, just because he was in isolation in county jail doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be in isolation in TDCJ. He's gonna undergo the intake process just like everybody else. They'll go through his family history, sociology, mental health, physical health, all that stuff. Of course, they've seen the TDCJ photos. Hair or not, everybody gets a shave, and your first picture is completely hairless, and within 6 months they'll have a second photo on the back of his ID card to show what he looks like with hair and without hair. And that was brought about several years back, just in case there's an escape, because people's identities and looks have changed over the years. But normally you'll go to the bird unit for intake processing. Once you're done with your intake processing, they'll send you to what they call a transfer facility, which, in that area up there, it's normally the holiday unit. And the transfer facilities is a holdover facility where you've already gone through the intake process. Now they're looking at your educational needs, physical needs, counseling needs, and stuff like that. And that's where they determine where they're going to send you from there onto your permanent unit of assignment. Now, for him, because they took him from the county so quickly, with him being at the PAC unit, and I don't understand why they're considering that a medium security facility. I tried to look to see what his custody actually was, and the different news outlets are reporting different things. Some are saying he's a G3 custody. Some are saying he's a P5 or P7 safekeeping custody. The unit that he's at is a G1 through G3, which is basically outside trustees, and G2 and G3s are considered minimum ins and minimum out, depending on the length of sentence. G3 custody is normally your people who are serving 50 years and more, and G2 is the ones that are serving, less than that or have a certain percentage of time done on that 50 years and more. So, for him, he's in a dorm environment. He's probably right now being kept in a transit part, with other transits. I don't think he's going to be in total isolation. Like I said, TDCJ is full of people who have committed murders, heinous crimes, things of that nature. I just think that they decided to go ahead and get him somewhere to let the media attention die down and let this kid wind down a little bit and start wrapping his head around doing his time.
Yeah, so let me ask a question, because when I did my show earlier today, this was a bit confusing for me. So I expected when he first gets into the facility some level of non-congregate protective custody, very limited interaction. I expected that. I expected him to be considered higher level. The way I looked at the statuses for TDCJ was G1 to G3, which was GP. Obviously minimum, a step above minimum. So the lower level G1 was like even camps, outside work details. Then a step above that, G3 was your medium general pop, but they were people that could have some time, 50 years. These guys could have some time. And then G4 were your disciplinaries, but not your serious disciplinaries, just people that you wouldn't be sending to lock, but still problematic. And then your G5s where maybe you're problematic and you're isolated. What I thought what made me a bit confused here, and that's why I redid the show, was if he is non-congregate protective custody, which I believe they're telling me he is now within a G3 facility like Wallace, right? He would be in an isolated setting. Would he not be considered a G5 inmate, or are you only classifying them based on the facility?
No, your classification within TDCJ is based on your crime, your age or susceptibility, and your behavior. When I send people from my county jail to TDCJ, I send a behavioral report to let them know, if they were a problem inmate or not, if they were staff assaultive, things of that nature. So just because you commit murder does not necessarily mean you're going to be maximum custody as soon as you walk in the doors of TDCJ. The one thing I can say about TDCJ is they have a pretty good classification system. Again, your G1s are your outside trustees. Your G2s are what they consider minimum in. They can work inside the prison, hold jobs, things of that nature, with shorter sentences than 50 years. Your G3s are also considered minimums, but these are minimum custody inmates that have 50 years or more and don't have hardly any time done on that sentence. And because he's got a murder sentence, they probably will classify him as a G3 until he gets 5, 7, 10 years done on it, because it is a 35-year sentence. At which point they'll probably go ahead and upgrade him to a G2. Your G4s are what we consider medium custody. They're problematic inmates, not really staff assaultive, just ones that don't want to go to work, or chronic rule breakers, possession of contraband, cussing at staff, just things of that nature. Your G5s are what we consider max custody. G5 is pretty much the top of the food chain. These are the guys that are staff assaultive, problematic. They're in their houses for 23 hours a day. They're only allowed out once for an hour. With him, he may be isolated until they finish the classification process, but I don't think he's going to remain isolated for long. Like I said, the facility that he is at, I don't know. I've never tried to share a picture, Anthony, and I don't know if it's going to let me. If I can try, if you're good with it.
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Hey, Joe, while you're getting that picture, I just want to ask something. What doesn't his placement in, let's say he's in protective custody and he's in some form of, I would say, non-congregate at first, because you don't know at this point. There's just too many variables in play when you have someone as high profile as him, right? You got, as I said, the racial tension right now. Could he be a risk? Could he be at risk? I got the picture, Joe. Hold on. Okay. And all of a sudden the news finds an interest. They pick something up. You never know how people are going to react to it. But my biggest thing is if he's placed at some level of ice, because remember, guys, he's also young. He's 19. So at some level, some facilities will also consider him vulnerable because of his age. So you got to be very careful of how long you put him in an isolated setting. Eventually, you're going to have to introduce him to the population, however controlled, maybe a congregate PC, whatever it is. But what I thought was confusing, which, hey, Brian, what I thought was confusing when I was doing this earlier was, even though, let's say he's classified as a G3, which he does fit, right? But the attention, a couple other things to me that does make him a concern if he was put directly into a dorm or directly into GP. Doesn't, because let's say he goes into a protective custody, some level of isolated confinement in regards to not being able to have interactions with other inmates until we find out if there's any safety concerns. Doesn't his status change because he's placed at some level of higher restriction?
Yeah, if he's actually placed in protective custody, he wouldn't have a G3 status. He would have a P status for protection. So that would definitely signify that he would be protection. And I'm sure, and I've seen it through the years, they will put him in a transient status until they can kind of feel how the temperature is, and eventually, group him in with others of the like, until either the temperature dies down, at some point, 6 months down the road, his name probably won't even, because they'll be on to the next bigger and better crime from that point, and with him, I don't think, even if he isn't in an isolation status, and you'll see by the picture I just sent, the picture of this facility. I don't know if we can blow it up any. This is basically a sheet metal. This is basically a sheet metal facility, not a dangerous place. It's not a hardcore facility. It's not max. It's not, it's none of that. And, I think sending him there was probably a good thing to do, because that it's a good facility to get your feet wet, because you got a lot of older convicts there, true convicts. And, you don't have a big problem on that facility with gang issues. You don't have a big problem on that facility with contraband drugs coming in. You don't see this facility in the news like you do some of the others with all the K2 deaths and all of that stuff. So sending him to that facility was probably a damn good choice.
From the news, it does show you a little bit from that facility. So, but my thing is, if they knew they were going to put him in some level of, this is what got me confused, and that's why I had to call you. So when I noticed that he was coming through the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, I automatically thought in my head, the protective custody, the highly restricted environment, the non-congregate protective custody, because you're managing the attention that could pose concerns and how you manage them in the prison. So I expected him to go to the highest level at first. And then when I saw he was sent to Wallace, and then I read about Wallace, I said, Wallace really, in my mind, wasn't, from what I saw, I could be wrong, but wasn't, I don't know, it wasn't ideal for me for him to start there, based on eventually it'd be like a dorm, walking around. So even though maybe Wallace does have these protective custody units, why not start him at a different facility that's more restrictive?
Because there's really, just because he committed a murder doesn't necessarily negate that he needs to be placed in a, I know a lot of people think that from watching shows that because you commit a murder, you go directly to a supermax and you're placed in this isolation cell away from everybody and everything. That's not the case in TDCJ. That's not always the case. The only time that you're going to go to a supermax is if you are a serious behavioral issue, or you're a danger. You may be a high-ranking gang member of an STG clique, things of that nature. Or you become so assaultive while you were at TDCJ that you require a supermax. Just because you commit a murder doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go to a supermax isolation. The TDC doesn't do that for several reasons. Number one, given his age, it could be more detrimental to him mentally. Number two, given some time, the flames will probably die down enough that they can go ahead and put him in a population setting. But
You
yeah,
think that's what they're hoping right now?
I'm sure. They want to stabilize this kid sooner rather than later, so they can get him. I wasn't even sure if he graduated high school yet. I don't think he did, or did he?
I don't know, but you mentioned something. I gotta look it up. But you mentioned something on the phone before, which was unique because, so if I'm looking at a 19-year-old, because there is we have to take note that he is 19, right? So yes, he's an adult, but he's 19. He's still a youth. So whether he committed the crime at 17, he's still charged as an adult. I get it, but he's still a youth. So I get when they're this age, you don't want to really put them in these restrictive environments because that could be detrimental to their development, right? I get that, but also you don't want to put them in open dorms or something like that because they're vulnerable to the population. And you mentioned, I think this could have been a smart move, could have been strategic. But you mentioned that Wallace is considered, or at some level, like I'm not going to say geriatric facility, but these are people that have kind of settled in their ways. They're not as problematic. You think that was considered one of the options? You think that was why it was considered one of the options?
Yeah, absolutely. Because of the fact that, I never heard anything about Anthony having any kind of gang affiliations or anything like that. That's also taken into consideration too when they classify you and give you a custody level and assign you to a facility. That's just one of the many things, besides the crime, your age, gang affiliation, educational needs, medical needs, mental needs, all that's taken into consideration. So, in his case, just because he committed a murder doesn't necessarily mean that he was slated for a supermax.
And he did graduate high school, Joe.
Okay. All right. So, and that's a plus on his side too, because, a lot of these inmates that come into the penitentiary don't have anything. And our state law requires that they attend a GED program and either get a GED graduation. Now they actually have high school programs too, where you can actually get a diploma. So, our law mandates that it's a requirement that they get their GED or diploma. So that's
once they're under 21, SFEA, whatever it is.
Yeah,
that's the federal law, ain't it?
Yeah. And Wallace, like I said, Wallace is one of those units. It's kind of a hidden gem. You don't hear much of anything about PAC 1. That's what they called it back in the day. It's one of those facilities that does not have a high incident factor for much of anything. Drugs, gang violence, problematic offenders, because it's a privilege to be at a facility like that, because like I said, you're in an open dorm. Most of these have cubicles, so you have basically your own private space, and it's a privilege to be at a facility like that.
And they're long-term inmates. I mean, a lot of people think that lifers have nothing to lose. They got a life.
Yeah, and a lot of these guys are at this facility are probably in their 40s and 50s now. They're older. They probably did a lot of damage in their 20s. When they first came in, just like all the other hotheads when they first come into the penitentiary.
I've always felt that lifers were more easier to manage. It's the little timers, the impulsive ones that really don't understand the severity of where they're at. Because with lifers, what people don't realize is people are like, oh, they got nothing to lose. No, officers have leverage over the lifestyle that they have. I could take away their TV. I could take away their commissary. So, I mean, you do have some level of control over a lifer within those within those facilities. But the ones that don't think they're going to be there for that long, well, none of this is going to affect me. I'm leaving.
Yeah, because they know regardless. My ass is getting out of this penitentiary in 3 years. Yeah. So it doesn't matter what you write a case for me for. I'm still leaving in 3 years. So guess what? I'm going to make your life hell until then. Whereas your lifers got all that shit out of their system, and they know they got to do out the rest of their time in the penitentiary. So they're going to make it as comfortable for themselves as they can. They fly below the radar. They mind the rules. They keep their dorms clean. They keep the noise down. you'd be surprised what having an old convict on a dorm can manage and keep in check. The older style convicts, they don't like heat being brought on their cells.
I do have a video I wanted to show you guys real quick. It's only 2 minutes. Let me just show you. This just got released. Let me show you this.
Feel good TV.
Wait a second. That wasn't what hold on. That was weird. Hold on.
Wallace Peck.
Oh, that's because
Anthony update y'all.
Hold on.
He just
that's not the one I had. That's funny. That was the clip of somebody doing the breakdown. I clicked the wrong one. Well, anyway, it was just telling you the most recent. This one. Let's do this one. Okay, hold on.
Hello, my name.
Let me set this one up, guys. Bear with me. I'll share this one out. That one's better. That was a guy. Oh, there we go. Good, you got it. That was some guy giving the breakdown. I didn't want that. I wanted the news one.
Live now from Fox, I am Andy Mack to Texas right now, and the story we followed since yesterday as Karmelo Anthony has filed a notice of appeal following his conviction in this murder trial following the stabbing at that Frisco track meet. As this from Live now from Fox, your own, saying the new released mugshot of Karmelo Anthony from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice as Anthony transferred to his unit of assignment at the PAC unit in Texas. Anthony was isolated in the Collin County Jail before being transferred to the Texas State Prison System. And again, this is the mugshot following that conviction, as we saw and heard the jury put down a guilty verdict and sentencing him to 35 years in prison. This filing of a notice of appeal is the first step in challenging the conviction and sentence before a high court. It's a routine procedure in serious felony cases.
Hey, Joe, real quick, did Texas shave his head?
Yeah. When everybody gets their head shaved when they go in, because they take 2 photos of you. They take one with your head shaved, totally clean shaven, and then 6 months down the road they take a second one because beards are allowed now in the penitentiary, and so they take a second photo 6 months from there. So in the event of an escape, they have both.
So he could grow his hair out and beard later on. Just at the very beginning, they start fresh?
Correct.
Oh, I didn't know that. And then someone else also said, you got AC there?
That's what I was just trying to type that's what I was trying to type. Not all facilities are air conditioned at this time.
If they're single cell, they may not be, but if they're dorms, don't they have to be?
No.
Okay.
No, we're under a federal lawsuit right now for several years. I think all TDC facilities have until like 2029 or 2030 to have everybody air conditioned. But not all facilities have had AC installed yet. Your mental facilities, psychiatric units have them. Some of your smaller 500 beds, the ones that were easier to put in and knock out and get out of the way. And then you have the older facilities like Wallace Pack and some of the even older ones that were from 1902, 1903, like the red bricks, that they still have to get air conditioned. So not all TDCJ facilities are air conditioned. They will be at some point.
Oh, we got Mona. Yeah, I got to give Mona the shout out real quick. Is she on there? So Mona's the one that got me. So the topic was a great idea from Barbara. Let me get that straight. And then when I did the show, that's why I love Mona too, because Mona had information that I did not have, which made me call Joe, which made me want to take down the show I put up. Even though there's a lot of good information on there, I wanted to take it down and then put this one up because there was a lot of explaining to. I don't think the video I originally did was 100% off. There is some confusion here in how this was done, because I also think there was some strategy here, like me and Joe had mentioned. Maybe putting him in this facility was a way to also not just manage the attention and his 50 years, but also his crime. Because let me ask a question like this. If he wasn't 19, but he still had the attention, let's just say that, Joe, he wasn't, I can move this video. I think, we pretty much know what's up with this guy. If he wasn't 19, but he had this much attention and he had the same amount of time, would this facility even be considered, or is 19 a good anchor here?
No, I think 19 is a good anchoring. If he was, like the guy that I was telling you about earlier in my county, that was given a 50-year sentence for shooting his girlfriend in a moving vehicle. He's 24, she was 19, and he's going to go through the process just like everybody else. I mean, he's not going to get swept away from the county like Carmelo did. I think him being 19's got a lot to do with it because at 19, you're not quite to the adulthood yet, so he's probably pretty impressionable. And they're wanting to make sure that, A, he's protected, B, that he's not influenced by other inmates who've done multiple times in TDC that may be gang affiliated and maybe trying to recruit him, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, him being 19 was definitely an anchor point in this, and sending him to Wallace Pack was definitely a strategic move.
You know what I thought was something unique too, before we go into what Joe sent here? So they're putting on the social media that the family's still requesting money. I guess they got over $600,000 for GoFundMe, right? So now they're saying he has no money. And to be honest with you, I think it's I don't know if this was strategic or not. Maybe I'm giving him too much credit. But maybe it was kind of smart that they did post up something that says he has no money, because if they knew he was making all this money from GoFundMe, that could have made him a target.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Joe, what is this here?
Okay, so that slide that you have up now, this is what that facility actually offers as far as programs, medical needs, educational needs. It goes through the whole. It's also a sexual offender farm. They have the SOTP program there. It's kind of each facility on the TDCJ website gives you a brief synopsis of what the facility is, what it has to offer.
They're saying he may have been an insane vice lord. I see IVL.
Do I know?
Well, the one gentleman, who's that? Oh, no, sorry, Fran. I read the name wrong. She goes, I have seen pictures of him with weapons and throwing up IVL. I guess that's insane vice lords. I thought anything with insane was usually white.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, and he'll go through when he goes through sociology, the security threat group sergeant or lieutenant, depending on what facility, we'll be interviewing him to see if he's got any kind of gang affiliations. It is really, really, really hard in TDC to confirm somebody, because I mean, you have to have an overwhelming amount of evidence in order, just because somebody throws up a sign, or you catch somebody saying, when they're chanting or doing that, and you hear them say on blood or on Crip or whatever, that doesn't necessarily give them an automatic green light to put them in a security threat group click.
Do you got people folk? I mean, I guess vice lord would be under people.
Yeah.
I mean, they're probably hybrid, right?
They are. They're not as big as your other cliques, Crips, Bloods, Tongo Blast. Even Mexican Mafia, Aryan Circle, their numbers are shrinking and dwindling so bad that it's crazy. IVL may be a new clique. I mean, you have different cliques in the different cities, like in Houston, you got the 5'9" Hoover Crips, which is basically your Highway 59 Crips. Same thing with the Bloods. I mean, there's so many different affiliations and variations.
It's unique. You say this. I used to study gangs myself. So 5'9" Hoover would be, they have their origins in Cali. Then you got the Rolling 60s. They kind of take up the 60s. So the same vice lords, they have their history in Chicago. And then obviously with when you had Jeff Ford and what's his name, Larry Hoover. When they were out in Cooks, I believe they started forming both the nations, because there was so much street conflict that they said, when you're here, you're either going to be folk or people. So you had those that kind of went under Jeff Ford and the Black P. Stone movement, and then you had those that went the other way to folk, which would be under Larry Hoover, Barksdale, and again the same vice lords. They're the ones with the champagne glass, I believe. The the gentleman look, the top hats, and then if you were to insult them in Chicago, you would tip the symbols upside down, and then in California, you do the Buto marks. You just cross stuff out, or maybe turn some numbers upside down here or there. But if he was false flagging, or calling up a set that he doesn't belong to, he'll get called out eventually. But the problem is if you're in Texas, they're all hybrids. Whatever's coming down from Chicago, most of these guys just claim it without even having the original connection. There's only so many gangs. Like usually, sometimes MS-13 actually they could be pretty organized. They could have a centralized hub. Definitely the Mexican mafia. But in this case here for Karmelo, if he was part of a gang, I think we would know that by now. I think that would have been released.
Yeah, and then like I said, they'll do an in-depth. The fusion centers will do an in-depth, investigation into his Facebook post and all that stuff. But like I said, it's very tough to confirm somebody as a gang member in Texas because you have to have an overwhelming amount of evidence.
You have you have 8 points that you can utilize. You need to get 3, or how does it work for you guys?
Well, I mean, they look, tattoos are one. They look at correspondence. They look at known affiliations as far as person to person. In my career, I've only been able to confirm 3, and that's only because I was able to catch one that had a Bible for Aryan Brotherhood in his property. He had the Aryan Brotherhood Bible. And that was the only reason why I got him confirmed. It is, when I say it's hard, because it's too easy to throw an STG a STG tag on somebody. And when you do that, it sticks with them for the rest of their life, in or out of the penitentiary in Texas.
Yeah. So
it goes into a gang database, and if you get pulled over 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line after you do your sentence, it's still when they run that driver's license, it's still going to show possible blood affiliation or possible gang affiliation. So they try to narrow that down. They try to cut back on that because there was a lot of people getting falsely tagged just because, say you're a blood member. I'm not. We've been friends since childhood, and I still communicate with you. I'm automatically a part of that. Yeah,
and I used to do threat suppression. Part of it was the identification. I used to work at the female facility, and it's tough because there's politics involved in there too, because if you identify, then it shows that there's a gang problem. That's another concern. Also, if you do put someone that may not be the right person, they may not be a gang member, you also could put them at risk.
Absolutely.
So the criteria we used to lean on was exactly what you said. Self-admission carried some weight, but not a lot. Not like when people, because I say I'm something, the investigator can't just run it and just say, okay, he is that. No, be careful. You got to have stuff to support that, because a lot of people could say it, and you got to know enough about the gang culture to be able to check them a little bit too, and then ask them like, well, who brought you home? Who, give me some history on your set. We would do the correspondence. We would do information from other law enforcement. We would take stuff from the media. But again, you don't take it in isolation. You would have to take it, and they would have a point system. And then once you got to a point where the tattoos, they really didn't hold a lot of weight because, they could be, sometimes people can make up meanings for it. What it is, but they'll make up something. They've been used to people asking this question, so they make up whatever story they can. But you would do that. And once you got what you needed to confirm, we would send it over to the investigative authority, who I'm sure worked somewhere with the prosecutors, however they worked. I wouldn't know that part. And then eventually you would get, a little while down the line, you would get an updated list, and you would have those that were confirmed and those that were sort of pending. And that list you have to protect, even though the people that are confirmed know, the people that are pending, there's such a risk if that list goes into the wrong hands. Because one, it gives knowledge that you don't want shared. I don't know if, as I said, I don't know if Karmelo Anthony was ever a gang member, but the sad thing is he's young. He could always become one.
Yeah. If he's not, releasing information or sharing information, could get him harmed. You know,
Yeah,
especially by a rival gang member who's got beef with that gang. So and you know, you don't want to get somebody harmed and then come to find out he had no affiliation with them to begin with. So, you know, that's why Texas does such an in-depth, you know, investigation. And I applaud them for it, because it's easier to get a conviction and a grand jury indictment than it is to get somebody confirmed on a gang list in Texas.
I believe that. Not even just in Texas. I had people that I knew, and I just could not get them confirmed, but there was enough on it, but they just didn't want to put that label. 2043, if he's out, I bet my country's property, he'll be reoffended. Hope I am wrong. Well, you know what? So let me mention something here. This is a good question. So it could turn into a good question. So he should be aware of some level of structure, because he was introduced to the jail. He's been locked up for about a year at this point, right? 2025, I'm assuming. So he's aware of structure. So when he goes to the state, eventually the structure, there's still structure, there's still routine, but it's not as confined or not as controlled. I mean, it's controlled, but it's not as controlled as a jail maybe at some level, because a jail you don't really look at as things long term, where the prison, you got to open it up a little bit. These guys are going to be there for years. So you got to have controlled movements. You got to have opportunities. You got to have jobs. You know, you got to have programs, education, you know. So this is him when he comes into the system. I'm assuming the intake, they're going to do their initial assessments. They're probably going to get stuff from the jail, stuff from the streets. But ultimately, when he goes into the intake facility, which I guess was Bird briefly, and then eventually after that he went right to Wallace, because they probably knew exactly where he was going. So let's just go through this and move him forward, because we don't, you know, want to keep him, you know, moving around as much. Let's get him placed. But this is the time where he's gonna kind of be interviewed. They're gonna find out everything they can about him, begin his folder, begin his process. If by chance because they do say he's in some type of PC setting, Wallace. Did they bring him to Wallace because eventually they plan on keeping him at Wallace, or do we see another transfer? Just maybe Wallace was the only area that had a PC setting like that?
Well, they're probably looking at a minimum in facility that was low key, you know, free of gang and drug violence. You know, you got to keep in mind TDC's got over 100 units statewide. So, you know, they're looking for a unit that was low key, something where he could probably fly below the radar, start getting himself acclimated to TDCJ rules and regulations. Because state versus county, babe, I'm telling you, night and day difference. You know, like at the county level recreation, I'm required to give them 1 hour a day, 3 days a week outside on the rec yard. Other than that, they stay in their dorm. They don't come out for chow. We feed them in there. Whereas with TDC, depending on your custody level, you're required to have 4 to 6 hours of rec a day, to include day room. So, you know, there's a lot of differences between county and state. County is a lot more restrictive than TDC is. You know, all those guys come out, they go congregate in the chow hall, they congregate on the rec yard. You know, they have day room together. With him, I'm sure he's probably in a transit status where he's either kept by himself or he's kept with other transits. I don't know what their process is right now as far as what their way of thinking is. If they're letting him wreck by himself for the meantime and kind of gently coaxing him back into the population setting, which I'm sure that's probably going to be their line of thinking. They'll see how he acts on his own for a little while, and then, you know, maybe allow him to recreate with other transit inmates. They could be sex offenders. They could be, they could be any class of crime. And at one point, you know, maybe a year or two down the line, they may just go ahead and send him to another facility and put him in the G2 population. But eventually that's going to be their goal, because they're not going to keep him in isolation long.
You know what is mind-boggling here? So thanks, Fran, for this. So he was charged as an adult. I kind of see this in the Anna Kepner case too. He was allowed out. He actually, once the trial was done and he got convicted, is when they they actually brought him in. So he was, after his arrest, Karmelo's bond was initially set at $1 million, then later reduced to $250,000. His family, $250,000. His family posted that bond, and he was released from jail under house arrest with an ankle monitor, essentially home confinement. While on house arrest, he was only allowed to leave with a judge approval for specific reasons, such as court meetings with his lawyer, school-related matters, and medical appointments. So they still consider him a threat. Under those conditions, he was able to finish high school and graduate under an agreement between advocates and the Frisco School District. He remained on his monitored home confinement status throughout the pretrial period and during the trial, coming to court from home each day rather than from a jail tank. And the moment the jury found him guilty of murder, that changed his bond status. That's when it ended. He was taken back into custody in the courtroom, rebooked in the county jail, and then transferred it. So here's my concern here. This is why I have a concern. So I get he was 17, and I know that's always taken into account. He's young, all this other stuff, but my big thing right now is the state may have to handle this downfall where he may be going through some depression. I mean, he just literally came from the street, was not prepared through the system, because that's, again, that kind of changes my narrative. He was in the jail. He was used to structure, used to routine, but obviously that didn't happen here. My mind is blown on that. So it's good that we do this live. So thank you, Fran, for that. That means that now, this is the scary part. The prison is introducing him to that now.
Yeah.
So maybe the reason why he's on the isolated confinement is because he's on some type of suicide watch.
I really don't think he's on a suicide watch. I mean, they may monitor him for any kind of suicidal tendencies. I don't think he's quite there. I mean, from everything I read about this kid, for all intents and purposes, he was a halfway decent kid at home. Listening to his parents, it's not like, his parents were very well spoken. So it doesn't sound like he came from a bad background of any sort. They may monitor him for a little while just to see, his reactions and monitor him for any kind of suicidal tendencies. But I don't think if he was on a suicide watch, he'd be in a turtle suit. He wouldn't be an inmate jumper.
I know it sounds crazy, but so in corrections and anything, once you're made aware of something, especially in management, you can't unsee it. So a high profile case, a lot of attention brings awareness. You got a guy a young kid who's been out on the streets, just sentenced to 35 years, 19 years old, was living the good life up until that day, then goes into the prison system. Even if he doesn't show signs, I would definitely put him on a constant watch for a little bit, because that's a lot for him to have to be able to manage. The fact that I would be more comfortable with exactly what you're saying, Joe, if he had some structure within the jail, and then went through something. But now you're putting him in the prison right when he just got sentenced to 35 years. He's coming from the outside, and basically, look how I don't think that was a smart move from the judge. And I'm looking at things at a higher level. Like I get, okay, let's forget the fact that he was a danger. Okay, let's just look at the fact that he just got hit with 35 years, and now he's gonna go into the facility hopeless. Now, granted, guys, we have to look at it that way. We work in the system. Like if I was in a jail, think about this way, and tell me if this makes sense, Joe, because now my mind's thinking. SB has green. Oh, okay, that's for them. Here's what I'm thinking: when someone gets arrested and they're going through their legal case, sometimes there's a level of hope, and maybe they're thinking they're going to get off whatever the lawyers tell them, and then somewhere along the line, as they're managing hope, at the same time they're managing their existence inside the facility. It's kind of two things, that perfect balance, so. The person's managing their case, maybe giving some level of hope, but they're also dealing with the routine structure of the prison at the same time. So the two things coexist. They're working at once. And I guess that level of hope gives the person a stronger foundation. But now the person is in hopelessness to maybe accept, even though he has an appeal, let's just say he's at some level of despair. He doesn't know what the prison life's going to be about. So basically he just gets the 35 years. and just throw him to the state. That's a lot for the state to have to handle.
It is, and I think that was one of the strategic reasons why they sent him to Wallace Pack. I think sending him there was probably a good choice versus sending him to a supermax where it's loaded with mental health inmates that are screaming and hollering and 24 hours a day, or filled with problematic inmates that are trying to kick the hinges, kick the door off the hinges at all hours of the night. Sending him to that facility, I think, was a good way to slowly introduce him into the structure of TDCJ, because that's one of those facilities that, like I said, doesn't have that problem where, sending him to a max facility, even though they have minimum men and minimum outs there, you're listening to guys banging their doors all night long, hollering, screaming. You got codes being called because guys on K2, smoking that crap in the day rooms. So, it may be a forethought, because of his age, and him being thrusted into the TDCJ lifestyle from the street, but them sending him to Wallace Pack as a starting facility to get his feet wet was a good choice, because you don't have the slamming and banging all day, all night. You don't have the K2 problem there. You don't have the gang fights there. It's a good facility to get his feet wet, to start learning the structure on how to do his time. Now, later on down the road, given his physical and educational needs, they may transfer him to another facility. That happens all the time in TDCJ.
Well, like I see Fran said that he he wasn't the good kid they made him out to be. He was previously suspended and was on suspension for bringing weapons to school the week he did this to Austin. And then Mona said he's not in a dorm environment. He's in PC solitary confinement, according to the president. So that's what I wanted to ask. That's what I wanted to ask too. So you mentioned something. So I thought, like, if he was coming my way, notoriety, again, the crime really, not to minimize what he's done. Bear me out, guys. We're looking at it from a management perspective. The crime, it's the attention. That's what it is. It's the attention and what it's spitting out through whatever the spin that's going through the media, the family, the racial tension that's now coming because it's being pushed out that way. Even though the lawyers have specifically said this wasn't a racial thing. So the first thing I would do if he was coming to my facility, especially now that I'm thinking he never served time at the jail, that would be a concern for me. I'm not going to lie, because I look for initial adjustment. I don't have it now with that, because I do lean on that initial adjustment. So the one thing is I would want to basically, he just got sentenced to 35 years. And I do this even when I'm at the prison level. If I got someone going through another case and they're at the county and all of a sudden their case is over and they come back to state, if the person just got seriously sentenced, they go to mental health, and most likely mental health will admit him regardless, even if he says he's okay, and then go ahead and, just before they release him, they kind of do it as universal precaution, because I think that people believe that, this guy was just sentenced for 35 years. He's got a high profile case. He's 19. They give you all these factors that really should push for an automatic response, because God forbid he did go to prison and the first night he did kill himself. What are the things that are going to come back to you? He was 19. That's going to come back to you. He just got sentenced to 35 years. That's coming back to you. What will also come back to you could be, dude, he was never in a jail. He never got a chance to understand how confinement's going to work. All the things that can come back to you later on, you want to showcase some level of exhaustion in your efforts to mitigate those. So I always look at, like, okay, what's going to come back to me that could make me seem that I'm negligent? And by the way, guys, attention brings awareness. So when you have someone with this amount of attention given to them, there's a lot more that you have to take note of. There's a lot more that you have to be aware of, because technically for someone in a managerial position like myself or like Joe, you don't have the excuse of saying, I'm not familiar with this case. Well, you better be. He's coming to your prison. I don't watch true crime. You better, because they're coming to your prison. You have to be involved in the news because there's an expectation that you are watching the news. And it's a fair expectation because you're managing the individuals who will wind up coming to your system. Or your facility. So the first thing I would do is obviously look at what I just mentioned. I'm probably going to have them talk to mental health, and automatically I think I'm going to place them on some constant watch, only because there's too much for me to not do it. And then they come back to me and say, you know what, it's negligent, because we could make the safe assumption, whether you watch the news or not, or whether you've been in prison management for how long, we could assume you have experience and you just didn't do what was correct here. And then the other thing is what I thought is, okay, so now he has the high notoriety. Where does that place him? So let's go ahead and put him in a PC non-congregate setting. Let's go ahead and get him acclimated. Let's make sure, staff is filtered. That's key. Let's make sure we have very limited interactions, but give him what he's supposed to get as best you could within those confined settings. And then eventually, like Joe said before, when the case starts to die down, but be wary, a case dies down and then there's a spark. There's an appeals, back on the news again. There's a lifetime special, back on the news. A memory for Metcalf or the gentleman whose life he took, back on the news. Or some person that wants to write his rights, wants to write his story, back on the news. So now the facility has to manage all that. Netflix picks up a special to tell their narrative, back on the news. So what do? You go back, you talk to the inmate, make sure they're okay. You go back, work with the investigative division, see if there's anything changing with their with their well-being, because I want to release them, but why you bring them back? Because Netflix has made him more popular. He wasn't as popular before, but now he's more popular. You think the case is popular now. Wait till Netflix get a hold of it, and you got 900 million views, So you got to manage the attention that the media doesn't give. Hey, I got to ask you a question, Joe. You got an inmate that, let's say, winds up getting picked up by Netflix. Does Netflix call you and give you the heads up that special is being aired?
Well, only if they plan on interviewing the inmate, because in Texas, you have to have a media release signed by that inmate in order to be able to talk to anybody, whether it be the media or, Netflix or Lifetime or whoever. And secondly, it can't bear any financial gain for him.
Yeah.
And I seen there was a post on there by Mana about somebody releasing a press release about him being in protective custody. That facility in general does not have protective custody. They may have some individual cells for transit status and security detention.
Oh man.
But if you bring up that custody screen right there that I sent you,
yeah,
that facility does not have protective custody.
You told me my first video was correct, but I removed it because of that. I when I did the video, guys, I leaned totally on my experience, and I felt that wasn't the case. But then when it was mentioned to me, I didn't want to. I said, well, maybe they do have. So let me ask you a question. Then I could be wrong. Then they must be planning for him to remain there, right?
Well, he still his screen. Let me.
Because why else would
his screen doesn't even show a custody status yet.
Right, but wait, let me ask you a question. We could assume well, no, you can't, right? Because G3 is the facility.
Because he hasn't even been through the classification process yet.
So let me ask you a question. When you
that's why I was asking, where these people were getting all these reports.
Well, when you haven't been through classification and you haven't gone, because you're right. Well, first off, he it looks like he sped through Bird. That's what I heard. So he must have been through some initial departmental classification.
He was given the intake. I don't know. It won't let me present it on my side.
What I read was he went to, is Bird in Huntsville?
Bird's in Huntsville. That's where the intake process. They don't classify you there.
No, but don't they, when they classify you to a facility, there's got to be some classification before they send
Well,
you out to the facility.
in his case, he went directly to a facility. That's not normal.
Oh, because it said here.
Normal process is you go to the bird unit in Huntsville, you go through the intake process, and then you're sent to a transfer facility where you're held for no more than 2 years until you are given your permanent unit of assignment. That's the normal process.
So wait. Oh, by the way, Robert, we did talk about insane vice lords. We did mention that, so that's probably going to get checked on when he's there. Hey, if you look at the video a little earlier, you'll see it, Robert. No, what I'm asking is this, right? So what I have is he did go there quickly. Again, just and then he went right to Wallace. Did he make a stop at Bird or at Huntsville?
I don't know if he actually went through Bird or not, or if they took him straight to Wallace and he did his intake there. I don't know. But the normal process is you would go to the Bird unit, do your intake, and then you're sent to the Holiday unit, which is a transfer facility. And then from there, you're classified and given a permanent unit of assignment.
So then how would they have known to send him to Wallace? They
did that probably because the style of the unit, they had a bed opening, because they have transit cells there, single cells. Back in the day, they used to call it SEG or solitary confinement, but they're actually considered transient cells now. So it's where they're probably housing him at this point instead of the open dorms. But if you look at that, if you bring up that screen that I just sent you titled Anthony, he doesn't. Wait,
which one?
No.
This one?
Yeah. He doesn't even have a custody designator yet. So we don't know if he's G3. We don't know if he's protective custody.
We'll probably know Monday.
Well, it'll probably be a couple of weeks before we see what custody he actually is. But if you look at that screen, that shows custody, that facility doesn't even have protective custody.
So let me ask something though. So that's a good question. So normally I'm assuming this is what we may have alike. Normally, whatever the intake facility is, the hub, they would be there for a couple weeks, go through a classification process, and then they would make the determination of what facility they can go to. But if you're high profile, you got some major time, sometimes they just skip that process because they know you can only go to this facility. So at this point, why go through all this way? And then what happens is the facility that they go to does the initial classification.
Correct. When he gets to his permanent unit of assignment, he is given his actual classification. At the Bird unit, they do intake. They do their sociology, mental, physical, educational needs, and stuff of that nature. Once they complete that, they're sent to a transfer facility, which is, I don't know, maybe 4 miles up the road from them, called the Holiday unit. There, they stay for no more than 2 years while they're waiting on State Classification Committee, SCC, to make the recommendation of what unit he needs to go to based on his medical, physical, educational, behavioral needs. And then he'll leave the Holiday unit and go to a permanent unit of assignment. They sent him to Wallace Pack because, number one, of his age, and number two, because the sheriff was in a hurry to get him out of the county, is what it boils down to, because they wanted the heat to die down.
Well, what does this mean, Joe? He was that okay? So he spent one night in Collins County. I should have caught on that. I've read that so many times today. What's funny? You get used to someone being charged with murder as an adult. You would expect them to be locked up, but again, Anna Kepner, this case, they don't do that anymore. But he was then transferred to a Texas Department of Criminal Justice facility northwest of Houston, and after intake, transported to his unit of assignment at the PAC unit near Navasota. Is that Justice facility northwest of Houston? Is that Bird?
No. The one that they're mentioning, Navasota, that's Wallace Pack. You got 2 units there.
No, the one before.
Yeah, that should be Bird. That's probably going to be Bird in Huntsville, because Huntsville is northwest of Houston.
All right, because it doesn't give a name there.
Yeah, it's probably the Bird facility, because that's where you go through your intake. They shave your head, they take your photo, they do all that mess, and then they go through your mental, physical, all that, and then once you're done there, normal process is you go to a transfer facility.
Yeah,
and
it says
then
here,
later on down the road, you go on to your permanent unit of assignment. So for
Yeah, it
him, he
says
went
here-
to it says he probably went to the bird unit, and then from the bird unit, he went straight to Wallace Pack.
yeah, it won't give the name, but then it says here, TDCJ doesn't publicly log each short-term stop, and that's why for safety reasons, right?
Correct.
You know, you don't want the public knowing when you're in transit. That's another thing, guys. When Karmelo was moving from Collins to, if that is Bird or the intake, to you're not telling people every stop. You know, he's still in transit.
Yeah,
So
'cause,
the only time you're going to find out where he is when he's finally where he needs to be.
Yeah, because I mean, we've had chain buses fired upon because of that. So you know, they probably whisked him out of the Collin County probably very early in the morning. You know, very early, like 3:00 in the morning. Loaded him up, got him to the bird unit, and then got him through the process rather quickly. And then from there, loaded him up and took him straight to Wallace Pack.
Let me ask you. So if he is put in, so I'm starting to see something here, and I'm trying to compare my experience. I oversaw a protective custody unit for a few years, so I am familiar with the practice here. I did oversee one. You know, I worked at a maximum security facility, and by the way, that's where our PC unit was a maximum security facility, because of the level of protection that's needed. But my thing is this: if he's in a protective custody unit, like Mona had mentioned, and you're saying there isn't one there, right? But could there be a stabilization unit?
No, that facility there, it's only a 1,400 bed, so it's relatively small. Generally,
so if they had an inmate in crisis, where would the inmate go?
Do what? I'm sorry.
If they had an inmate in mental health crisis,
He would go to a psychiatric facility. We actually have our own psychiatric facilities within TDCJ.
right?
Have,
I know not all facilities have stabilization units because it costs a lot of money. So, like, if he had a mental health crisis right now in that PAC facility, could they manage him there?
Depends on the level of crisis. If it's like anxiety, something like that, they could probably manage it there. All facilities have access to psych services. Somebody that may be schizophrenic, somebody that may be, up there in the mental health crisis umbrella, probably not. They would have to send him to either Skyview or Jester 4.
Let's say he threatens to kill himself, and it gets directed by mental health to put him on a constant watch, which I think
that they would manage there. They would put him on what they call a constant direct observation, and they would have an officer sitting in front of a cell 24/7, watching every action he has. They would take all his clothing, give him a suicide blanket, suicide suit.
So if we revisit what Mona was saying, sort of, and what you caught was that there's no PC here. Could the solitary confinement be a mental health constant watch, which would make sense to me?
Yeah, I mean they can utilize those cells for constant direct observations for mental health if they need to. But Texas hasn't had solitary confinement in 10 years. That's
well, I don't like using that word either.
Well, no, I'm just saying. I mean, we actually had a solitary confinement plan, and they did away with that because it's. They did away with it.
Yeah, you guys are doing it right now.
So those cells there, like that facility there probably has 10 single cells in a SEG style environment back there. They're single cells used for, pre-hearing detention for major cases, for major write-ups. They could be used for constant direct observation for one that's, that claims he's suicidal. Or they can house a transit. I mean, they could literally house a transit protective custody in there, but they couldn't keep them in there long.
Well, that's what I wanted. That's what I was actually getting at. So,
but until we know what they actually classify him as, until it pops up on that website, because I've seen 3 different news reports, and each one shows them in a different custody status.
Yeah, but let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question, Joe, though, because when you look at what you sent me, I don't think it would say PC. It would just give him a G assignment.
No. If you look at some of the, I'll send you the link for the TDCJ website when we're done with this.
If an inmate's in PC, they note it on the public website?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. It'll say safekeeping, or it'll say like P1 through P7.
Oh,
and if you look at the style of the facility under the custody frame I showed you.
Yeah, let me get it back on, Joe.
Where it shows G1 through no, that's the inmate information. It's going to be one that says custody.
It's maybe this one. Is it this one?
Yeah, I got my site ain't what it used to be. Shows the capacity. Does it say on there G1 through G? Yeah, okay. Where it says custody level, housed, G1 through G3, security detention, and what I can't read what the last one says.
Well, it's the highest level is the restrictive unit.
Okay, so each facility has a restrictive unit, but if they actually house protective custody on that farm, on the normal, protective custody would be listed in there as well.
Yeah, but so wait, so this is a bit interesting here. I just out of curiosity, guys. I hope you guys could. I'm sure you guys understand the technical stuff here, but I want to learn a little something here too in the process. So when someone, let's say, is in protective custody, right? So I'm used to working in a system where the level of status, right, equates to their placement. So if I'm dealing with a person that's restrictive housing, they would be considered max, let's say. PC would be considered max. Would I consider a PC inmate a G5 inmate?
No.
Really?
No. The two custodies are totally separate. G5 is max. That doesn't necessarily equate to PC. Protective custody in Texas is just that, protective custody. It's not G5 max custody. It's not G4 medium custody. It's not G1, G2, G3. Protective custody is just that, protective custody. It's classified totally separate. It's classified totally separate from your custody, your
right,
regular.
So the way that's done, then that allows for the protective custody or the P level inmate to be in a G3 facility.
Correct.
Because that's how I'm seeing it.
If they classify him, if SCC classifies him as a protective custody, P1 through P5, he'll be sent to a facility where there's other P1 and P5.
Wait, why are their number? What's the number designated? Is that their level down out of the program of PC?
It's levels down out of the program.
So is it 5-1?
Five being your most restrictive.
All right. Do you think you're going to see him as a P?
I don't know. I mean, I really don't see where he's going to be a P. Honestly, I mean, I the only people I've seen go into P status are ex-judges, ex-police officers.
So Joe, let me ask. I'm sorry. I mean, there's a lot here. Let me ask you a question. If I get what you're saying now. So if I'm a G5 inmate that requires protective custody, I will now be P5 only because I'm entering protective custody in a G5 facility.
If you were a G5, what's a good example? Okay, say you're the number 2 man in the Mexican mafia. You're a G5 because you stabbed 5 other inmates, you've assaulted 3 guards, but now all of a sudden you have a hit out. They change your status from G5 to P based on the needs, P1 through P5. So he could, in essence, go from G5 to P5. But just because you're a P5 doesn't mean you're G5. G5 is just your behavioral custody status.
Right. So if I was I get what you're saying now. So if I was a problematic inmate, and I'm not talking about a G4 nuisance disciplinary inmate, a G5 security threat, and somewhere along the line, there's a hit on me, and and I now my PC has to be handled within that G5 facility.
Correct. If they have protective custody housing. If they don't, then you're sent to a facility that has protective custody housing. If they don't have protective custody housing, you're placed in restrictive housing in a single cell where nobody has access to you until they can get you transferred to a facility that has P5 housing.
So it's interesting because the practice I'm used to, guys, is, and this could play out here. So it's good to get to know the practice, guys. This is knowledge you're probably not getting anywhere else. I'll tell you that right now. I don't remember seeing this dialogue anywhere else. But I'm used to PC being considered max status, therefore they have to be in max facilities. And I like how Texas may manage that, because usually when you put in max facilities, there's restrictions that technically suck, because if I'm a PC inmate and I'm being treated as if I'm a maximum inmate, I'm also being deprived things that normal general population would have. And technically, to be honest with you, I should be allowed to get those things because I'm in GP. I'm sorry, I'm in PC, but I'm non-problematic. So I should be getting exactly what the general population is getting. So I think what Texas has done is they have probably took that into consideration and have found PCs in those different levels. Would you have, what happens if you have a full minimum, a G1 PC inmate?
He would instead of being G1, he could be a P1 or P2, P3, P4. You say we have a trustee that you have an outside trustee that, 5 years down the road, we find out he was a lieutenant with the Mexican mafia. Okay, since we have that information now, we know that this guy's going to need some sort of protection because, he's in an open dorm environment. He's in a trustee environment. He's still susceptible to being hit. So therefore, we have to take that into consideration and put him in protective custody in a P level. But as far as what he's entitled to, he will still get his G1 benefits. He'd get his full spend at commissary. He would be eligible for his recreation, all that stuff. Yeah, your P1 through P5s, depending on how you're classified. P1 is where it's the lowest level of protective custody that there is. A single officer can get you out of your cell, escort you to the shower, put you on the rec yard, give you your hour rec, put you up. P5, you damn near have to have a 5-man move team with you at all times to bring an inmate out. It could be, or it could be mid-range. P3, where you're required to have a sergeant and an officer bring you out of your cell, a supervisor.
Yeah, and obviously, 5s don't mix with 4s, 4s don't mix with 3s, same as the other side of G1 through G5. But also, I think the reason why Texas is able to do this is you have more facilities.
Like I said, we have over 100 facilities statewide.
Yeah, so I mean, that's something. In order for you to manage that alone, you're going to need 10 facilities technically.
Yeah, if you were in a smaller state where you only had 3 facilities statewide, obviously we would not be able to do what we do. But because of the fact that we have over 100 facilities statewide, we're able to have a facility that has half the facility or P1s through P5s that can go to rec together and go to day room together and go to chow together. In the smaller state, and that's why Texas is able to separate the custody status from protective status.
So I'm glad we have this dialogue, Joe. I'm glad that you're back on the show. Thank you, Barbara, for thinking of the idea. Thank you for Mona for putting up the right information to make sure I keep honest shows. Even though I still think, Joe did say, I don't think I was off. I just think I didn't provide enough clarity or context, because even what we're talking about here, I didn't even know enough to ask that. I just saw what I saw and I said, Wallace unit, why would they put them there? And then go ahead and realize that there's some strategy there. It's more than what the internet says when you look it up. I'll tell you that right now, because I looked it up before I did the show. I actually had off today from work, so I was looking up Wallace unit to get some understanding. And then the person I spoke to literally said, well, he said what you said, Joe. So technically, my video just needed more context, but it said there is no protective custody. And that's when Mona had came in and Mona always has good intel. So I every time she says something, it's coming from somewhere that I can lean on as a resource, even if it has to be corrected later on. That's the information that's out there in the moment. And she had put the solitary confinement, the protective custody.
Yeah, and with the media, you got to take what they say as a grain of salt. Just because they say somebody's is a protective custody is not always the case. You know, he was probably placed in a single cell, but he's afforded all the same benefits that a G3 gets or a G2 gets. Recreation, he gets his mail, gets his full spend on commissary, gets to make his telephone calls, all that mess. The only difference is that he's kept away from the dorm environments for now until they can monitor him and see how he's going to react and if they can slowly work him into population.
But when
the press says protective custody, you know, the first thing the public comes to mind is, you know, he was sent to a max facility, placed in a hole somewhere, you know, and that's not the case.
So is the goal ultimately, well, that's what I thought, to be honest with you. And I but that was my experience was also telling me the same thing. So I was confident. But so ultimately, so if that's the case, then I could see them releasing him pretty quick into Wallace, into the GP.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's what they're going to do. They're gonna slow roll him for a little while until things die down, and then they'll try him out on a dorm to see, you know, how he blends in. And if he blends in there fine, then there's no reason that he could either stay there and do his time, or he can go into a permanent, you know, go to another facility as a G2 and do his time and get.
How would you manage if you were planning on rolling him out and you were in charge of this? What are you doing before you make that decision to introduce him into the GP?
If it was me, I would spend probably the first week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, watching his mannerisms, monitoring him behaviorally to make sure his you know, mental needs are there, to make sure that mentally he's doing okay. And then, you know, within the following weeks, I would go ahead and try to, you know, get him to congregate with other transit inmates that may be there, you know, on high profile crimes or you know, things of that nature. You know, let them recreate in the day room together to see, you know, how he copes. You know, basically, you know, gradually work him into a GP setting. I wouldn't necessarily just, you know, keep him in transit by himself for a week and then throw him into an open dorm. You know, I would gradually and slowly work him into a GP setting. And there's ways of doing that. You can, you know, they may not have it at that facility, but you can send him to another facility where they have a cell block of nothing but protective custody. And most of those guys go to day room together. They go to chow together. So, you know, there's ways of gradually introducing him back into the GP setting.
My biggest concern here with him is because he's got the notoriety and because there always could be concerns, because at any point his case could become central in the spotlight without us even knowing. I mean, it's great that they call you for the interviews for these guys because they need your approval, but they're not going to call you for permission on when they're going to put it out and what they're going to put out. So you always have to, you know, manage that. And obviously, before you put him in before you take him out of PC through the level down program, you're going to ask him now if he says, "Hey, guess what? I don't want to go out of PC." I would keep him in PC. I would. Wait, what do you got?
But again, until we know what they actually classify him as, you know, or you know how they classify him, And Manna brings up a point too. If he's had these TBIs and he's epileptic, which I hadn't heard anything about. But then again, when you're trying to monitor 40 different news agencies, everybody's got a different spin. Wallace is a medical facility for geriatrics. And that may be another reason why they sent him there. We don't know.
But that's the case. I get what you're saying, Mona. I know it's out there, but if that's the case, I didn't hear nothing about that in the jail. They would have known about that at that point.
Well, that and every facility has medical. So they wouldn't send him there specifically just because he had a TBI.
By the way, it's epilepsy. Most of the population, because they have drug use, a lot of them suffer from that. So that wouldn't be a reason to specialize, because every facility should have an infirmary, and they should be able to handle epilepsy. But with that said, hospitals, there may only be a few, but unless he had a really bad seizure, but then he would probably also be he only just went there, he'd probably be at an outside hospital. So I don't know if that was the only reason, but it's knowledge. It could make sense. But I think, like Joe said, I think this is ultimately for his placement. Yeah.
Because every facility in TDC has an infirmary. Every facility in TDC has their own in-house needs. 30% of your population is diabetic. Probably another 30% of the population has had a TBI from a car accident, football game, some sort of accident. These are all things that are already accounted for, and that's the reason why every facility has an infirmary. Most of them can take care of their needs in their own facility, but they wouldn't have sent him to Wallace Pack specifically because of that. Because hell, we have epileptics. You figure with a population of 140,000 inmates.
1/3, maybe more.
You would think, at least a third of these guys are diabetics, and they get their shots right there in house every day. They get their seizure meds if they're seizure prone. The only difference is they're given a bottom bunk restriction, so they sleep on the bottom bunk if they're in cells with top and bottom bunks. Everything is handled there, so they wouldn't have sent him specifically to Wallace Pack just because he has epilepsy or a TBI.
Yeah, and Dead Man's wife asked a good question. He said about are there any youths anymore without a medical diagnosis? I want to mention something with that. So obviously, you don't really diagnose anybody that's a kid or a young teenager. Usually it's when they become a youth that you start to look for diagnoses, and believe it or not, because their brain is still growing and still trying to, find logic and reason in there, a lot of them will be considered vulnerable. So a lot of young, if I'm young, I'm a youth, and I get locked up, some of them could easily find themselves under mental health care, because mental health may say, well, you know what, they're still young. They're still trying to form that frontal cortex is still forming. So that in itself could make them more impulsive, harder to manage. And the age may be enough to say, you know what, let's bring them in our mental health unit. And I know that for a fact because, I've dealt with young kids, and I dealt with juveniles too. And when the juvenile got a sentence to adult time, mental health wanted their hands on that child because the child's mental capabilities, they're still forming. One last question, Joe. For me to answer with the protective custody thing, I will mention this. So the process for protective custody like this would really be pushed on by administration, but you would still ask the inmate or the legal team if they would want their client, or would you yourself want to be in protective custody, because that helps the process, even though you're going to get it anyway. The other side of congregate and non-congregate is involuntary or voluntary. You always want the voluntary. There are some people that, even though they know the threat is real, they don't want to be labeled, all this other stuff. They don't want to be seen as weak. So they may push involuntary. And the funny thing about cases like this is that the facility has to put you in PC, at least at this point, to kind of figure you out. Sometimes people, in an effort to get the lawsuit, they'll say they don't want to be in PC. They'll say, this is involuntary because they know you can't move them. They know administratively, if you move them, it will be negligence. So they do try to get the lawsuit because they know, well, if I put involuntary, now you're forcing me in there. And sometimes they get something, sometimes they get nothing, but they try civil stuff where they're just civil stuff. You just give money away technically. But what you do is I would ask, do you want to be in protective custody? At the very beginning, I'm putting him in my mind. I'm putting him in whether he wants it or not. Now, when I decide to move him down the levels, however that works, you got to consider protective custody a program, sort of, and you work your way down. You work your way down ultimately from not interacting with people to ultimately interacting with people to ultimately a GP. And sometimes you may just ideally you want to introduce the person back to GP, but even when you can't. You still want to give them some level of congregate interaction. You never want to keep them at the highest level of non-congregate. You want to try to put them, if you can't get them in a GP, you want to put them in the middle. You want that interaction, especially for a 19-year-old kid. A 19-year-old kid, you don't want that person stuck in isolated congregate PC because eventually you're protecting them from physical threats, but the mental threat is crawling into their head while their brain is still forming. And by the way, we do have to care for him. Now, here's where it gets a bit tricky. As Joe and I mentioned before, it gets a bit tricky because if there's a chance where I do want to start moving him forward, I think it's time. I think like Russ, like Joe said, it's the case is not as popular anymore. The race war is gone. They've gone through the last appeal. There's really nothing right now that is going to spark new interest. Let's just do that. I think that's key. You're always going to get further interest, but the further interest dies out. This ain't looking for something that doesn't spark new interest. And by the way, you got to be careful too that notoriety doesn't make him a celebrity. I forgot to mention that earlier. Just put that thought, apply that where it goes. But that thought was in my head. I forgot to say it. But that's just the thought I have when you're dealing with inmates that have notoriety. You want to make sure you manage them in a way that they don't gain influence either because of that notoriety, because that's when they become a celebrity. I had that thought before. I forgot to say it. But either way, to finish this thought out, now I want to bring him into PC. I bring him out of PC. I am going to have to talk to him. I have to do everything Joe said, 100%, mental health, all that stuff, work with the investigative division, see if there's any threats, talk to officers. I mean, really do my due diligence, check phone calls, do everything. Then once we all agree, mental health agrees, everybody agrees, I'm going to go talk to the inmate, see how they feel. The inmate will state their concerns. For a case like this, with the notoriety, if this inmate tells me no, that he doesn't want to leave PC and I don't have any other option, I may say, okay, well, you don't want to leave PC. What about if I sent you to this facility? Or if not that I want to negotiate, but you don't want to keep them in PC. So that's always going to be a last resort because of the isolated setting. So if there's a chance you can get him out, I'm going to try. Okay, so you're having a problem if I release you here. What about if I release you at this facility? What about if I release you at this facility if you fit that status or in this unit? And they still say no. I would probably not move him. I think he could be in a position where he could manipulate PC for quite some time. So if he does decide that he wants to go out, I don't think it's going to be because administration forced him out. I think it's at one point there was an agreement made and he's where he wants to be, but I mean, does that make sense to you, Joe? Or
yeah, it does. And you're going to have that handful that manipulate the process because they don't want to be with a cellie. They want to stay in a single cell. They have it all to themselves and stuff of that nature. But like in Texas, once the threat is gone, or we have determined that there is no reason for him to be in PC anymore, and he refuses to move, at that point in time, we start issuing cases, write-ups for refusing housing. And the inmates will try you. They'll, I'm not moving. Okay. We'll, the threat's gone. There's no reason for you to be in PC. We've determined that there's no threat. There's no reason for you to be here. I'm telling you to move into this house. And he says, no. Okay. Well, we're going to issue a case for refusing to move housing. And then we're going to start dipping into your privileges. Usually by that second case, they're done with that. When they go from being able to spend $120 a week at commissary to only 40, yeah, they'll usually tap out on you. Okay, I'll move.
So I do have a question related to that, Joe. I'll be devil's advocate. So if I got a guy that's got a specific threat and is trying to use, let's say I have a problem with you, Joe, and we're cellmates, whatever it is. Not that I would get protective custody for that. But let's say Joe is a member of the Bloods. So after Joe comes at me and I'm trying to manipulate protective custody because I want to be left alone, I want my own cell, I'll first start off with Joe. That doesn't work. Well, Joe's a member of the Bloods. All the Bloods are coming after me. And you try to hold these people to specifics. You do. It's like you can't just go into PC without having specifics. You got to tell me why you need it. When were you threatened? Where were you threatened? What was said? Who said it? I mean, it's just as much it is to get out. It also should be a bit of a complicated process to get in because people will lie to you in generalities, but you need to hold them to specifics because if not, everybody would like to go to PC. So now Joe beats me up. Joe's a member of the Bloods. Now, even though this had nothing to do with the gang, it was just me and Joe had a personal problem. He doesn't like the smell of the bathroom after I go, let's just say, because that happens a lot. With inmates, the share in the small space. So we get into an argument. I use that fight to say I can't be in regular population. They say, well, it was between you and Joe. Well, Joe is a member of the Bloods, and I've been getting threatened, blah, blah, blah. So at first, okay, maybe it is relevant. Maybe there is a threat. We'll look into it. Then you find out the guy's been there for a year, has never received a threat from any Blood. You do your due diligence. You really do your due diligence. It looks like the issue really was between him and Joe. Joe's not beat for some shit. He already beat the guy up. He's not looking to do anything more than that. So, a year, no threats, nothing coming through. They meet him again with the committee, and they're like, hey, listen, we did our investigation. Basically, it looks like you had an issue with Joe about a year ago. Since then, there really hasn't been a threat since the incident. So we're gonna want to get you out of PC. Well, I don't want to leave. No, you're going to leave, and these are the options you got. So either you choose these options or we'll choose it for you, and we'll take you to another facility, and then you could do your lock time at that other facility. So you're no longer going to be here. And like Joe said, the other facilities can manage their own disciplinary. So technically, all I got to do is get you out. And then once I get you out and I give enough paperwork to the receiving facility, letting them know, hey, he's coming. These were his concerns. This was what the investigation was. The latest update on the investigation, there is no threat. He's going to try to get back into PC. He's going to try to come back here. Just know if he's trying to come back here on those older threats or on that older issue, he's not to come back here. So what happens here now is I ship him out. He's gone. Eventually he learns, hopefully, to, persistent thighs out. We should be a little bit more persistent, and then eventually his attempts fade out. Now, I'm able to get him out because I was able to lean on my specific findings against his generalities, and now it's like, you know what? You can go. I want to stay. Nope, you can go. I've done my due diligence. You can go. Now, for someone like Karmelo Anthony, he's put in not because he was specifically threatened, not because someone came to him and said, I'm going to kill you for killing that white kid or whatever it is, or he was put in because of the notoriety, what's coming of the case right now, the attention, and basically it's just if you don't put him in, you have all these variables that can come into play. Now, if I decide to ship him out into another facility, I don't know if I have anything to lean on that could definitively tell me if he says, I want to be in PC, I don't want to leave. I don't know if I have anything strong enough to say, well, you know what? The case is no longer popular. I don't know, or you know what, the attention that you came in with, that attention's no longer there. I don't know, because that's what got him in the first place. So I have to lean on something to kick them out. And I don't think, because even if you did the investigation, what the investigators would say when they do their investigation, they would probably say this. This is the scary part. They always add a caveat that puts onus on the person making the decision. So let's say the administrator, the director, whoever oversees the PC, if they have to make a decision, right? They're going to make a decision on what the investigator writes, right? But it's always going to say this to protect the investigator, because that's what happens. Departments are going to do whatever they can to protect each other, but eventually someone has to make a decision. And what the investigative authority would say would be something like this: at this time. At this time. And that is a concern. When you got to make a decision and someone puts at that time, I need to lean something on specific that lets me know that, okay, at this time is permanent. At this case here, that would be hard for me to lean on, because, Joe, if you were kicking a guy out of PC, whatever that investigative report is that needs to give you the information before you let that person go, because it's not going to be something you're going to do blindly, you're going to look at that report and you're going to look for some definitive language for this case.
Well, it's a little different in Texas because of the fact that we don't have RCOs and TDCJ are not, even the supervisors are not licensed police officers. Therefore, we don't fall under that scope of investigative authority or have a legal team. I mean, we have a legal team, but we don't use them for that purpose. We don't use them for lawsuits. But the investigations are done, the safe prisons investigations are done by the lieutenants on the shift. And the reports are forwarded to the unit classification committee, which is made up of a classification chief, a warden, and a designee. And they're the ones that make the final determination whether or not, based on the lieutenant's report, if there is a need for protective custody, if there's a further need for him to be in protective custody, or if he could be returned to population. So it's a little different here. But on the same token, we have to exhaust, as lieutenants, we had to exhaust all avenues. We had to look at their property, scan their mail, see if he's made any phone calls, talked about threats. If we received any reports from STG, hey, just a heads up, letting you know, these guys are talking about a possible hit on this inmate, things of that nature. But if we don't find any credible evidence during the Safe Prisons Program investigation, it basically, we forward the report onto the unit classification committee. And, I've never used at this time. I was pretty much direct in accordance with all the testimony, interviews. I find that there's no credible evidence to substantiate the offender's allegation. I don't put an opinion in there one way or the other whether he should be returned to GP or, I'll leave that up to the unit classification committee. They base their findings off of my report and not my opinions. So it ultimately rests with them. And, if he says that, he tries to use an old allegation, we do what we call a subsequent investigation based off the original investigation.
Yeah, that's what we do.
We determine that there's no new evidence to support the offender's, initial allegation or subsequent allegation. And again, that report is forwarded on to the classification committee, at which time they'll say, okay, he interviewed, 15 people off of your cell block, 3 staff members. He looked at your mail. He listened to your phone calls. At no time did you ever state that you were in fear for your life from inmate Ganji because he threatened you. You never said, they look at the totality of everything.
Right.
And that's how they make their determination. And they'll tell the inmate, okay, there's nothing here. Therefore, we're going to recommend that you be returned back to general population, but we will house you in another area of the facility. And if they refuse, start from that point on. If they refuse, then they're issued cases, because a lot of these guys, you can pretty much just by interviewing them, you can tell if they're being manipulative or not. And then when you listen to their phone calls, they say they're in fear of their life, and you listen to their phone calls, and 10 minutes prior to them making the allegation, hey, I'm fixing to get up out of here, man. I'm fixing to go get me a single cell. And, you listen to that kind of stuff on the telephone, that's just something else you can use. In the Karmelo, specifically, I don't think that they assess the need for him to be in protective custody right off the bat. I think they're just being preemptive. He's not a person of interest. He's just an interesting person right now. And I think TDC is just being preemptive and not putting him directly in population, because, this kid's crime has made all the major news outlets. I mean, like I said, I got a guy now that just signed for 50 years for shooting his girlfriend 3 miles from my house in a moving vehicle. And, he made the local news. He made the regional news in Beaumont, but he's not one of those crimes that made national news. So, he may be an interesting person, but he's not a person of interest. So,
yeah, but I agree. The only thing I'm curious on both sides is only because the way the narrative is going.
Yeah, and because of all the tensions and everything that came with the case, TDC took it upon themselves. Okay, we're not going to just classify this guy and put him in a population setting. We're going to take this kid. We're going to put him in a transit status in a single cell for a while, and then, slowly start to introduce him into the society of general population.
Yeah, because it's becoming my biggest thing is, I agree with you. It's not so much about the case. At the end of the day, these cases really aren't on the hierarchy of hit list. But once it starts to, go into the media narrative, and now that they're going to fuel the racial tension, because that's what the media does to get the views, that's where it becomes the concern, because the narrative will take on its own, on its own course. And now the problem is, if something does happen to him, it will be related to the narrative that we know is forming right now. Like if you, right. I've seen it. You have guys that, could be living in population for a while, and all of a sudden something changes in the narrative, and it's like, well, we got to bring you in. Why?
And that's why you do a gradual stepping stone. They made the right call doing what they did with them. Now's the time where your statewide STG guys should be monitoring telephone calls. As well as I do, there's outside companies that monitor our telephone calls, even though we monitor our own telephone calls, where we can put in keywords, like Karmelo or, stabbing, or, and listen to these phone calls and listen to the nature of the phone calls to see if there's going to be, if you can anticipate that there's going to be any problems from these facilities if he were to go here. So, they have so many tools at their disposal that they're using right now that the public and we don't even know behind the scenes to establish whether or not this kid is going to have any issues later on down the road or not.
Right. So, like, if by chance, and by the way, guys, I actually looked up something not too long ago about keywords that sex offenders use, and they still use it when they're locked in the prison. Acronyms, all this stuff. They got their little dialogue too. My biggest thing is 19. You got the age. That outside the fact that his crime has become notorious, whatever it is, his age would be one of the big factors for us. He's 19, and granted, on top of everything else, but the age is important too. But let's say you release him in GP tomorrow or Monday, and he got killed that day. Let's just say. Would the facility have an excuse?
No, not if you knew ahead of time that
what would come back at them, do you think?
Well, I mean, the civil liabilities would come back at them.
No, I mean, what would be the things that the outside would push that they would expect the facility that should have handled before they would have released them?
Well, I mean, if you listen to his family and you listen to, other members of the public, they would want him in PC to do his whole 35 years in PC and you can't do that. It's not realistic. It's not tangible. It's you know what I
Not
mean?
healthy.
It's not healthy. And, you know, and it's just kind of like, you know, years ago when we were talking about solitary confinement, you know, we talked about solitary confinement, and the first thing that comes to mind is his Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption, big black hole that they throw you in and leave you there. You know, that's what the public perception is.
Which it's not.
And in reality, you know, they get treated better than the GP inmates.
Yeah.
Because they're catered on, they're waited on more. So, you know, again, you know, with Karmelo, you know, them sending him to Wallace Pack, I think was a great strategic move because they sent him to a good facility.
If he's staying there.
Well, I mean, even if they keep him there for a year, chances are this thing is going to be in 6 months. They're going to be on. There's going to be another crime somewhere that somebody's on.
Yeah, well, you're so spot on.
You know what I mean?
There's experience talking there.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be another crime that they'll focus on. You know, you mess with one dummy until the next dummy comes along.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So, and that's why I think they made a good move sending him where they sent him, because it's a good unit to get your feet wet. It's filled with older convicts that really don't give a damn who you are or what you did, as long as you don't screw with them. And you don't bring heat on the dorms. You don't bring the law into the dorms, and you're not a thief, and you don't openly disrespect the staff. You know, I think they sent him to a good unit to get his feet wet, a good unit to start the gradual steps of introducing him. Because I'm telling you, 6 months down the road, something else is going to come along, and their attention is going to be on that. And then Karmelo's going to be another inmate lost in the 125, 130,000 inmates incarcerated mix.
Yeah, and guys, by the way, time doesn't matter either, because situation changes, the case gets another perspective thrown out there, whatever it is. But ultimately, wait, what is this? Another race hustling crime will come along. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you don't just manage the person, you manage everything they come in with. And sometimes, you know, I know you want to be consistent with everyone, but sometimes people have greater baggage and you only have so much resources. Hey, Joe, anything you'd like to say in closing? This was a great dialogue, and we're doing more, Joe, so don't run away from me again. We're going to do more shows again.
Yeah, I mean, you know, given all things considered, I think Karmelo, like I said, has been placed at a good facility, because, you know, he's actually going to learn how to be a convict. He's going to learn how to do his time the easy way. I'm glad they decided not to send him to a max facility, because I think that would have probably harmed him more mentally than anything. You know, and again, you know, what you guys see on these news outlets, you got to take with a grain of salt, because it's not always 100% fact. We'll know more on Karmelo later on down the road once they get him classified and see how they classify him. But he's in good hands at a good facility with good staff. You know, his medical needs are being tended to. I think, given his age, is the reason why they sent him there. I think he will fare there, you know, fairly well versus going to a max facility. Again, you know, just because somebody says on the news he's placed in protective custody, not always the case. He may be in a single cell by himself in the back in restrictive housing as a transit until they can find a way to incorporate him back into population. But it doesn't always mean true blue protective custody. So it's going to be interesting to see how this pans out here in the next few weeks. Like I said, you know, you can go on the website, the TDCJ's website, and look him up, you know, in a few weeks, and you'll probably see that he was given a custody level, and, you know, we'll know more when it happens. But, you know, I think TDCJ's strategic plan is to get him to a facility that's calm, relatively calm, free of violence, free of drugs, and, you know, all the other things that come with, you know, a max facility farm. But even though he's on a minimum farm, I think it was a good call on their part. Again, to let the flames die down, ease the racial tensions, and start getting this kid resigned to doing his time. He's eligible for parole in 17 and a half years. So we'll see what time holds for him.
And by the way, guys, once we get the status, maybe me and Joe can come back on and revisit it because we'll have greater perspective. And by the way, last time I had Joe on, it's been a while. I got a picture of Joe last time I had him on. You ready, Joe? Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see.
Last time I had you on.
Oh, damn, I had a hat. My mustache didn't have that much gray in it, and I was wearing the same shirt. Imagine that.
No, I chat GPT'd you from 20 years ago. You want it? Does that look like you?
It did at one point in time. Not anymore, brother.
I'm gonna send that to you because I just chat GPT'd you. I said, make this guy look 20 years younger. But yeah, I'll send it to you. Guys, this was a good Joe, just trying to provide some information. I think this is a little bit different than what you're getting everywhere else. I mean, the key is technically, you try your best to figure it out, but situations could happen that could change things, or I just think we have some experience that can guide you through it, but you never know. We're trying to give you every different angle that's out there, but ultimately in corrections, you could deal with a lot of surprises, and all of a sudden the shift. My guess is somewhere along the line he will be released, even though we were playing devil's advocate. I do believe he's not going to be there forever, and I believe if he's going to get released, I still think it's going to be in this facility, just for the reasons that Joe said. That's the safest way to manage him. And they're saying you're a handsome man. That's the safest way to manage him. And I think, then eventually when he's finally placed, you'll have a little interest for a little while. And then eventually next time you see him or you get interest, we'll be in our 80s. or for Joe, 122.
Yeah, 127.
127? All right, guys, if you like the content, do buy me a cup of coffee. Link to that in the description as well as top of the YouTube channel. Stay safe, and Joe, maybe I'll have you on again in a couple of days if that works.
Take care, folks.
All right, take care, guys.